With 5G on the horizon, the most radical technology upgrade yet, the growing world of connected things and how users access digital information will take another leap. We've been hearing a lot about the future of connectivity and what this means from a consumer and use case perspective. What about for the industry players and the ecosystem of people that support the enablement of our connectivity? What does this really mean in the near term, and what do we think we'll see in a few years? Today, I'm here with Dave Couture and Jack Fritz from Deloitte, who will help us separate the hype from the substance as we explore the future of connectivity. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
We're really happy to be here on an important topic for not just our industry, but for the macroeconomy.
Great. Thanks, Heidi. Thanks for having us.
Dave, I'm going to dive right into the terminology. For our listeners, what is meant by future of connectivity?
Let me start with a couple of framing elements. First, we're moving to an always connected world as consumers, as businesses, and as society at large. If we just think about ourselves individually first, how many devices do we have today that are connected in some way to the internet? We probably have at least 3 or 4 are PDAs or cell phones and laptops or desktops. And then more of us will have some sort of connectivity in our vehicles, our appliances, and our house has now got some of them that allow remote control connectivity. We're just getting started. Think about that now from an enterprise business perspective. They connect each individual employee, they connect each individual machine, they connect each individual function internally, and then with every one of the customers and partners that they engage with as well. So it is pervasive in how we work, how we commute, how we live. It is evolving today, and it will be different because of the connectivity of the future. Connectivity is predicated on the assumption that the technology underneath it is in place to support it all. So when you hear things like 5G and spectrum and wireless and deep fiber and small cells, all these technologies are bringing us closer to what's possible with the future of connectivity.
Jack, what's your perspective on the possibility of future of connectivity?
As we look at the networks of today, they're generally fiber light. So what that means is there's not a lot of actual physical fiber in the ground. There aren't maybe as many small cells and bigger macro cell towers out there in the surrounding area of your neighborhood. And really, everything is overbuilt on one another. So when you see someone digging up your street, what feels like time and time again to put in more cables, that's what we mean by overbuilding. And this really, has been leading to large swaths of the country with substandard or even non-existent broadband. And that contributes to a lot of the discussion that we're seeing around digital divide. In the future, the networks are really going to center around heterogeneous architectures, and we see that really leverages the existing network and equipment along with shared infrastructure. They're going to have a lot more fiber, there will be a lot more cell sites, especially small cells, and they're going to be defined by software with virtual functions. And as these assets and technologies are deployed, we're going to begin to see a lot of the massive speed gains and improved coverage. And these are the things that tend to catch more headlines, but really all of that is built upon this kind of hidden infrastructure that a lot of the consumers I don't think totally see or realize.
I do want to make sure we sort of simplify a little bit, at least for me, for some of the listeners who may not know what exactly is 5G and why is it different.
At the most basic level, 5G is simply the 5th generation of wireless technology with large-scale deployment and usage. There are lots and lots of trials and initial small sampling deployments going on. There's lots of standards that are being aligned and integrated right now. It's the 5th generation. It provides a pretty significant leap in terms of faster speeds, lower latency, and more capacity, both in terms of the amount of data on the network and the number of connections the network can manage. It means that I'll be able to download a high-def movie in under a second. And it enables things like connected vehicles, things that can't tolerate even a few seconds of delay to become reality. And what's really exciting is that when you think about a world with that much faster speeds and lower latency, what you could do as businesses, as enterprises, as services built on top of that capability.
Jack, let me turn it over to you before we go deeper into some of these other areas. Help us understand what spectrum is and how you see it evolving.
Spectrum is really just the range of channels or frequencies that you can operate in. So as we think about it, spectrum is that last bit of connection between your wireless device and your router or a cell tower or a small cell, et cetera. And it's absolutely critical to an operator's coverage and capacity, and it has significant impacts on both their operating and capital costs, to say nothing of the different impacts customers' experiences. So if you're dropping phone calls in a building, in an elevator, that's based on certain frequencies and certain coverage characteristics versus having a slow experience downloading a movie or watching something streaming. There's really kind of two ways in which it comes to market. One is the more unlicensed traditional way that I think a lot of consumers are more familiar with, in the sense that these are frequencies that anyone can use. So things like Wi-Fi in your house, it's what baby monitors use, or garage doors, or a fan remote control. And then there's also licensed. These are licenses that were originally brought to the market by the government and were originally sold for specific uses. So things like radio stations, public safety communications, and of course now we see today the networks that our smartphones use. And really there's now a third kind of bucket emerging here, which is more of a hybrid of the two, where there's a licensing structure where you might have some of the spectrum is licensed, but then if it's not being used, there's a secondary tier which is more unlicensed or shared, where you kind of get first to use it. If the license holder isn't using it, then you can access it to try and improve the overall utilization of that. And what I think a lot of people don't realize about spectrum is to put spectrum, the asset itself, in the context of financials. This has traditionally been recorded, at book value. It's a static asset. The carriers don't really adjust for changes in value based on the secondary market, where the values almost always go up. But there's almost $250 billion of this asset on the book of communication service providers today. And with 5G's data explosion and the ever-increasing need for more and higher speeds and the cost to acquire and deploy spectrum, it seems unlikely to let up at any time in the near future.
As 5G and spectrum evolve, what major players are going to shape the future of connectivity?
So recognize it is global in nature. There will be every, local domain, whether that's a federal government, as we call it, or state or city, will have certainly an input into how they define to regulate in management. And again, almost every country has their own tailored approach to that. And so regulators will play a role, but from a business perspective, it'll be many of the traditional players. It'll be the telecommunication carriers that we know of today, the infrastructure providers. We talked about the cells and towers, but there's also a lot of equipment that goes embedded within that for sure, and they're going to continue to have a key role. They are the incumbents in the ecosystem. They have defined where we are today, and they're certainly going to play a critical role in shaping where we go in the future as well. But there's a bunch of non-traditional players that we think will be actively involved. This group will be increasingly important since the amount of infrastructure build-out required likely exceeds the financial capacity of any individual player, and certainly in the core telecom industry in and of itself, in some of the compressed and desirous timeframes. So we would expect application providers, solution development. You can think of the world of cloud and collaboration. Those players out there that are driving the pervasive use of cloud technology and or of social collaboration, where eyeballs and access are really, really important to their businesses, I think they're going to play a role as well.
Jack, the amount of infrastructure to build out this fiber is massive, and the capital required can't really just sit on the shoulders of two main players. So this idea is going to become more and more critical. Is that a fair assessment?
I mean, we did some research last year, really talking about 130 to 150 billion needed just to build out the fiber infrastructure for all this, and that doesn't actually, cover the small cells, the macro cells to fill in the networks, all the additional kind of locations and real estate, et cetera, the equipment. But just for the fiber itself was 130 to 150 billion dollars, and these are just staggering numbers, and that's it doesn't go away either. Then you have to maintain it and continue to expand on that. So there's a lot of capital that's going to be required to realize this.
What new participants do you see emerging in the connectivity ecosystem?
I can think of a few groups here, and one of them that really jumps to mind is financial players. So whether you think of spectrum or small cells or fiber, all of these are critical to 5G, and they're starting to get a lot of increased interest from financial sponsors who are viewing these assets as more and more similar to more traditional real estate investments. And the more they understand the space, the more I think they're going to be, entering and becoming more active participants. And there's obviously some others as well. So, and Dave mentioned this, there's governments, and they're participating in new ways as we think of public-private partnerships, and they're looking to monetize a lot of their own assets, whether physical assets like their light poles, where that's a good candidate to put a small cell. And then they also have things like rights of way and permitting, right, as ways to monetize there. As we think about utilities or infrastructure players, there's an inherent interest in communicating with the sensors or the techs in the field in their distributed networks. And then we also have content distributors. So obviously 4K quality video is expanding. The number and size of screens is continuing to grow. And then on top of that, we have new and emerging technologies with, digital reality, AR, VR, and as that becomes more widespread and more interactive, and we think about things not just like total amount of data, but also the latency to get that kind of real-life effect, where the latency in the 5G network is actually faster, is not as slow as, what the brain can comprehend. So it seems as real in real time to the brain, and so that's going to be critical as well for those types of applications.
Dave, what are each of these players thinking as they prepare for the future of connectivity?
For the communication service providers, we think that there's both an offensive and a defensive perspective. From a defensive perspective, they have massive customer bases and assets that Jack highlighted a few of them, but preserving, protecting, enhancing those customer bases are really important, and so they want to be on the forefront in bringing to those customers the advancements in the technology and what 5G can yield. On the offensive side, they also have a chance to explore a plethora of new business models and develop new solutions that drive more top-line growth for their business and adjacent businesses. To think about the types of services that can be developed on top of these real-time speeds is a new market opportunity. Any like utilities, they're on a fixed rate of return models, and they need to make sure that they're driving cost savings in each of the businesses, which means they have limited funding for investment. So everything they will have to do will be much sharper focused on the specific applications and use cases that they're going to try to drive as we work towards a world of 5G. And in the funding and rebuild of cities, for example, take what happened with this year's hurricanes. Telecommunications and networking is getting some of the funding as it's increasingly recognized as a critical part of the infrastructure and the vibrancy of cities. So for infrastructure providers, this is their chance to reposition and be the one who owns the customer relationship in the connected transportation and very tight relationships with, again, the cities and the municipalities from which we as citizens and businesses engage. You think about the connected car ecosystem. It's not too far out there either. They will similarly be looking for ways to own and control the development of the connectivity infrastructure to enable a world of autonomous driving, not just for us individuals, but for large aspects of the population, public and private transportation. And so they all have a niche and specific use cases they're trying to leverage relative to their current base and to some value-added markets that they can move into.
It does sound like, from what Dave and what you have shared previously, that there's tremendous amount of opportunity, right, for everybody. But what challenges do you see that may prevent connectivity progress?
Well, one of the huge challenges that we see really is the lack of the sufficient infrastructure, and we alluded to this a few times as we think about supporting 5G and kind of realizing that future vision. And really unlocking the potential rests on the assumption that there's going to be enough fiber extended near the end customer to provide more dense coverage of the networks. And we talked about the 130 to 150 billion for that fiber infrastructure, and that's just over the next 5 to 7 years. But then there's the additional cost beyond that as well. And then as we think about the responsibility, right, who pays for all this? I think that's a question that a lot of people ask. And it really isn't all on the wireless service providers. It involves, both the carriers, there's U.S. policymakers, and ultimately there's also investors who may not be traditional players, but they're starting to look at these types of areas, whether it's fiber, small cells, et cetera, as an investment and talking about it more like a real estate type of opportunity versus a telecom or technology type of investment. And so I think there's a lot of different participants in the ecosystem. I think it's going to vary, by different parts of the country, because the current starting point and what is there will change as well. And so we see a lot of opportunity here, but it's going to take everyone kind of working together to be able to realize this vision.
If we can overcome this fiber challenge, Dave, what are the new business models that we may begin to see evolving?
If you just think about 10 or 15 years ago, and the amount of new services and capabilities and things that we all do as businesses and as consumers that we couldn't in the past. But within specific aspect of 5G, there's a couple of framing dimensions. It's the next advancement of connected everything, the Internet of Things and the like at real-time speeds with no latency. And you can think of whole new markets that enables, from connected health and remote health, as if you're there in person, ability to diagnose, to deliver a whole range of healthcare-related services. You can think about real-time entertainment and connectivity as if you're at the live event and being able to do that on any device, anywhere. And so and then if you can think about a really, really high-velocity manufacturing type environment that from floor to ceiling and from one end to the other has speeds that to really allow analytics and processing and supercompute paces throughout the entire manufacturing line from one area to another. So there's a whole bunch of advancements in that arena. That's one. The second is, I think it's an additional advancement to help close the digital divide, to provide more and more access to areas of population and society and in rural domains that haven't had access or haven't had a chance before. With choice, they'll be able to choose to be part of the connected economy and hopefully at price points that they can afford.
Jack, for those who live and breathe telecom, what should they be thinking about for the next 6 months or the next year?
Sure. So spectrum is one of those things that definitely jumps to the forefront. Spectrum, as we talk about that, it's really the buying of spectrum, the clearing it. So a lot of it currently has other users in there, whether it's the Department of Defense or other government agencies. And then it has to get into the networking equipment, so all the switches that are put on the towers and in the network itself, and then having to also put it in all of our devices. And people, upgrade their device every 24 to 36 months, so it takes a while to kind of get those devices out into the market. But a lot of that planning starts today. And then as we talk about fiber, and we mentioned this a few times, it's going to be critical both for the backhaul from the small cells and from the macro cell towers, but it's also going to be important as we secure it for long-haul transport as well. As we think about small cells and the densification, so getting a lot of the permits and locations in place and starting to really think about what is the strategy, how are we going to approach small cell and network densification, because that's going to be critical for both the coverage in these areas. A lot of the spectrum we're talking about doesn't travel very far, maybe a couple hundred meters, as well as the capacity. So as we get a lot more devices in a small area, that's going to take up a lot of the capacity from towers, which means we need more towers or cell sites. And really what a lot of this, comes down to is, I just said, more spectrum, more fiber, more towers, more cell sites. That means, at the end of the day, more money for operations. And so a critical thing for, I think, the telecom operators to be thinking about, which they obviously are all the time anyway, but here's really an area where as they transform kind of the network architecture and infrastructure, thinking about what does their cost structure of the future look like, right? So as you have, you go from 50 to 70,000 towers to a few 100,000 cell site locations, what type of cost structure are you looking to have in the future, and how do you maintain that, both from your business model with customers, as well as maybe thinking of other ways to potentially fund and cover all of those obligations going forward? And so I think those are really the key areas. And then lastly, I would say, learning from each other, learning from a lot of the trials in the market. We see carriers are taking different approaches on what they're trying to bring to market. They have different starting points, but I think ultimately, whether it's fixed, whether it's mobile, there's a lot of opportunity around 5G, around a connected world. And really, over the next 6 to 12 months, there's going to be a lot of trials, there's going to be a lot of announcements in the press, and I think just learning from one another, from the equipment vendors, and seeing what works and just kind of staying abreast of all that is going to be absolutely critical as well.
Dave, what should other industries be considering? Where is their opportunity outside of telecom?
I would encourage all industries to be thinking about how they can best capitalize and take advantage of the opportunity that these higher speeds and increased access is going to enable, both in terms of improvements of things they do today and whole net new arenas. I think you can go across every industry, since we do live in and we do have such dependency right now on connectivity. Think about it at a multiplying and compounding degree of speed and accessibility and what you could then do with it. So I think the opportunity is endless.
This is a very exciting area, and before I let you go, we are going to play in a quick 30-second debate on this topic. In the past, we've always considered consumers to be the winner in the connectivity ecosystem. Jack, we're going to start with you. In your opinion, who will be the winner in the future? Jack, you have 30 seconds.
Can I say everyone? I mean, joking aside, I really do think that we're reaching a turning point where connectivity is in everything that we do, whether we're talking about a connected car, tactile internet for remote surgery. There's so many possibilities. And in all of these areas, the solution providers, both new and old, are vying to differentiate in new and innovative ways, which means new infrastructure, so equipment, networking, software. And the ultimate beneficiaries, I think, are those who participate in the new connected world. And those who choose to kind of batten down the hatches are the ones who risk being left behind.
Excellent. Dave, over to you. Clock starts now.
Consumers are without a doubt going to benefit from it. They are going to get more, and oftentimes we're getting more for less. And I think that will be the same with consumers. But I think from a business perspective, I think it will be those that think in advance to use this to create competitive advantage for their current customer base and then create net new profit opportunities for them with value-added services they can invent.
Excellent. Very nice. Good timing. Thank you for engaging in our quick 30-second debate on this topic. It sounds like there's a lot of uncertainty in the connectivity ecosystem. Major players are continuing to transform the way the world connects, but new players in technology, as well as new industries, are beginning to rewrite the rules. A lot is uncertain, but we know a few things. There will be massive device and traffic growth, both of which will drive significant change in the underlying infrastructure supporting connectivity, such as 5G and spectrum. And all of these changes will continue to evolve connectivity and transform our lives. I want to thank our guests, Dave Couture and Jack Fritz, for joining me on User Friendly. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.